I also rise to speak on Senator Hanson's private senator's bill this morning here in the Senate. And as we've heard contributions from Senator Scarr this morning as well too, I know he's someone who has worked very closely with members of the African community. I know a lot of other multicultural communities in Queensland, but particularly I think the African community, Vietnamese community, and a very insightful contribution in terms of the benefits that we all get to enjoy from a number of migrant communities who have come to Australia to call Australia home. But I do find it a bit ironic that this week is actually Harmony Week, a week where we are meant to be celebrating and recognising the diversity that makes Australia such a great place to live, the envy of the world, bringing people together from all different backgrounds, about the how inclusive we are, about how respectful that we are, and the sense of belonging to the greatest country on earth. And yet, before us today in the Senate, we have a private senator's bill that has been in this parliament, and I remember back in 2018 when I first came into this place and making a contribution then, a bill that continues to be placed on the notice paper, and that's the senator's right to do so, but an area of debate that, in my opinion, has well and truly been long gone. We are no longer debating these type of these bills, and rightly so. We've already debated the terms of this bill back in 2018, and then we had the bill reintroduced after the 2019 election, and now we have the bill here again today in the Senate before us for debate again, and I suspect we'll have probably the same outcome. And when I did speak on the bill in the past, many others in the chamber had also talked about their backgrounds. And, as a proud son who came from family who came from Italy, migrated here after the war, we came to the country and my parents made a great contribution. And I really do feel compelled to speak on it briefly today because it is important that we place on the record not just our opposition to these type of bills, but talking about the benefits of migration to Australia. It's this very place that was built, Parliament House, in fact, where we had a number of migrants who came and put together every single brick, all the concrete, all the timber, all these pieces of furniture we have here today. And I've never come across a migrant who isn't proud to be an Australian. In fact, I find them much more prouder to be Aussies, particularly on citizenship days. You find them, and I've written about this many times, about how proud migrants are to call Australia home and to be Australian. I've never found people on citizenship ceremonies, particularly on Australia Day, to be so proud to be an Australian and to call Australia home. Because they want the best for their kids, they want the best for future generations. And it's these sort of reasons why, I had to speak on the bill beforehand, along with many others, because it is fair to say that this bill does fail to understand Australia's heritage and fails to understand the future of where this country is going, but thanks to the contribution by migrant communities. And I want to make it very, very clear to members of this place in the Senate that Labor will not be supporting this bill. We never have supported and we never will. And as senators will remember, when this bill was initially introduced some parliaments ago, as I mentioned earlier, we opposed with vigour then, and I note that we will do so now, and opposed also by those opposite when they were in government with the same degree of vigour. And it was a strong language that was used by some in the government then, and I wanted to just refresh people's minds about what was said. There was nothing noble about this bill, is what one government senator back then said. Another also said it will put economic improvement at risk. And we do hear from time to time about the economic impacts of migration, but it is interesting to note, though, and again to place on the record, that this government, the Albanese government, thanks to the work that it's had to do in the Home Affairs Department since coming to office, is now actually seeing migration levels tapering off. In actual fact, migration levels are forecast now to drop. By 2030, we will see we will see around 30% less than what was forecasted under the previous government. We've already starting to see over the next 2 financial years, in the forward estimates, migration levels dropping. And it's not because that we're anti-migration, but we do recognise there needs to be a change of focus on our migration in this country. One away from temporary migration to more permanent migration, and migrants who are wanting to make a permanent contribution to this country, a meaningful contribution to this country. We had a number of visas that were on offer that did prop up parts of the economy, but were only for short-term hits. And what this government is saying, enough of that. We want to see migration levels stabilise. We want to see migration that is on a more permanent basis in order to have a much more long-lasting impact that is much more beneficial to our economy and to this country. And it's the hard work that this government is doing in the home affairs space, bringing migrations back to a sustainable level after all the comparable countries experience a surge after post-pandemic levels. So we're trying to restore some integrity into our educational system as well too. And as I said, the analysis by the Centre for Population shows that the Australian population is now expected to be smaller by 2030 than the pre-pandemic forecast by the former government. I really do hope that when others, if there are other contributions here today, when in considering this bill again, that we do count on the support of senators, particularly those opposite, to not just vote down this bill, but also to make very clear the type of sentiment that this bill has. That we have no place for this bill in our vibrant and very robust democracy. I know there's been a number of issues that were raised by Senator Hanson and Senator Scarr and others, but this parliament can handle debates of all those natures. I mean, we are trying to, as a government, pass through some legislation to deal with the housing crisis. We're also trying to deal with the economy and trying to tackle the cost of living crisis that is currently before this place. The parliament can walk and chew gum at the same time. But we shouldn't also be spending time where we are putting a question to the people in a very limited context without explaining to them about the full context of what migration has actually made a significant contribution, rather than the negative question that is being put, that somehow migration is bad, when in fact it is not. And as you can see, what we have done so far is to ensure that this House will recognise that our story of this country, the story of us, of who we are as migrants, is tied to our heritage as a proudly migration nation. Now, with the exception of our First Nations people, all of us have come here at some point in search of a better life for ourselves and our families. Today, nearly half of Australians were born overseas, or at least one parent that was. And as I said, in my own case, my parents came here after the war in the 60s from Italy, because they knew that this place was where one could actually work hard, get ahead and create a future for their children. They weren't alone. They joined roughly 7.5 million others since the war who heard about the same promise. And they wanted to also join in, packing their lives into a suitcase with very little, making that journey to this land and priding itself on having boundless plains to share, as we say proudly in our national anthem. We owe much of our prosperity as a nation to those who make this journey. Indeed, the Australia that we all know and enjoy today simply would not have been possible were it not for the contributions of many of these people who were born overseas and people who've been here for a very long time. And in our community, roughly 1 in 3 businesses are now run by people who have a connection to a migrant community. Treasury has also outlined in many reports, and I think in one of their recent reports, estimated that the migrant intake was worth around $10 billion over the 5-year period. Migration improves the Commonwealth's fiscal position, since migrants are likely to contribute more to taxation revenue, and they claim in social services or other government support. And I can attest to this myself in my home state of Victoria, where one can barely walk down a mall or a high street without seeing the value that migrants make to our economy, Acting Deputy President. But central to the defence against the kind of divisiveness that we are seeing before us is not merely the important role that migrants play in our economy. Rather, it is advancing the vision that we all have for our nation. What would Lygon Street in Melbourne look like without the coffee machines? What would Box Hill look like without the dumpling restaurants? What would Oakley be without the smell of lamb meat wafting around down Eaton Moor? And I know there's a couple of Victorian senators who are smiling, but they understand where I'm coming from. And, we really need to be careful about when we do have these debates about what is it that we are trying to achieve. What is it that we're trying to fix? It's not the people that are causing the problems, and I think it's fair to say that we need to look at, how can we as a parliament and governments do better? But let's not go after the individuals who want to make a better life here in this country. The truth is that this nation would not be what it is today without the contributions that made by those who have come here, hoping to make a great contribution to this country. It is not for us to subject this to a divisive and, perfectly honest, I think, a very hurtful plebiscite. And whilst Labor accepts that it is important that we make sure that we get the balancing right in our migration program, this is the responsibility of any government to decide with the best advice at hand. And look, there is simply no place in our inclusive and proudly diverse nation for expensive polls, but we really need to have a serious think about where we go forward as a nation. And this is clearly not a bill that I and members of the government will be supporting.